presentation by the Honorable Prime Minister Brown, but he has informed that there are at least three additional tasks that he has mandated himself to accomplish today, and he has extended his apologies. But I informed the PM that his colleague, Prime Minister Harris of St. Kitts and Nevis, will shoulder the responsibility on this particular session. It is a task that is normally shared, and since St. Kitts and Nevis is our close neighbor and we have done so many things together, I know that Prime Minister Harris will be very, very responsive to this task ahead. On this panel, we will also be joined once again by Dr. George Brathwaite, the editor of Caribbean Times, and Mrs. Pamela Cook Hamilton, the executive director of the Caribbean Export Development Agency. The Caribbean Today and Beyond. Pam, George, please. The Caribbean today is challenged on many sides. Debt to GDP very high, fiscal disparities being unsustainable, the high costs of inputs and severe disadvantages in the cost of energy, a weak transportation sector, youth unemployment, difficulties posed by climate change, the proliferation of guns, the dangers of drugs and violence, the persistence of poverty, reduction in donor support, reduction in the private sector spending, CARICOM's LDCs still clinging on to faith in the CSM rather than by sight of real tangible benefits, replacing expectations that things would be made right and countries would not be further disadvantaged as a consequence of becoming a signatory to the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. Has sufficient efforts been made to change the perception of CARICOM being a coalition of unequals? Have we earned the trust and respect of the international community as a grouping of independent sovereign states with significant clout? These are indeed challenging times for the region, and it requires an agile, adaptable, vision-oriented approach to the work of the community. These are some of the issues that will be dealt with during the course of this final session. May I first invite the Honorable Dr. Timothy Harris, Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, to share his perspectives as we seek to chart the course of the Caribbean today and beyond. Prime Minister Harris.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would make some quick observations and then leave it to the discussants to make the more substantive remarks. From your own introduction, I accept the point that we certainly are at a crossroads of our development. And that point was borne out from the discussions that we have been having across the region about how do we get growth, how do we get job-rich growth, to use the phraseology of the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, because certainly there can be growth, but the growth is not felt among the mass of the people who in the end matter most. So it is critical that the growth that we experience be job-rich. That is, people are finding work as employees and as self-employed persons. That is going to be critical. And what we have found is that by and large the Caribbean region over the last 30 years has lagged in terms of its own GDP growth rate. And therefore, we have to do substantially more. Much of what you speak to now has been our reality, a region with a high level of indebtedness, high level of unemployment, and disturbingly high levels of unemployment among young people. We need to change that scenario as we look towards a future which we must consecrate. Some years back, the Caribbean diplomats, technicians, had determined that the pathways to growth and development for the region would come from a number of sectors which we had to pay particular attention to. Tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, energy, financial services were what were outlined then as the pathways which would lead to sustained growth. I believe, by and large, that we will still have to focus for the foreseeable future on those particular areas, but adding, in my view, the sector of cultural industries. One of the area which has produced, in my view, somewhat disappointing results has been the agricultural sector, in that by and large our region still is the region that has a high dependency on food imports. That reality has to be reversed. A region that cannot feed itself cannot survive. And having regard for all the great potential that we have, the abundance of land, for example, in Dominica and Guyana in particular, we have to be able to do more. And we have to truly transform agriculture from what it was in the days of my grandfather and great-grandfather. What has been absent from the agriculture practices has been our restraint, our inability to apply the science and technology to transform the agriculture. And so, as people in Antigua and Barbuda, perhaps yesterday smiled at the blessing for the rain that fell, nobody perhaps was more happier than the farmers. At long last, they breathe a sigh of relief. But it need not be that way. There are shade houses and greenhouses and water management systems that we must invest in and bring to the farm and to the farmers. It is part of the old view that we have not given our farmers and the farming community, in my view, the respect that they deserve. And so our governments could see merit in giving to the hotelier incentives, tax exemptions, duty-free from rug to ceiling. But when it comes to our farmers, we are very picky and stingy in terms of the support and the investment we are giving to the farming community. We have to move from the subsistence farming to people really doing it on a commercial basis, doing it in large numbers to satisfy the felt need. And certainly we will not be able to do for everything, but we must identify those areas in which we have potential strength. And having regard to the challenges to our own health, the high incidence of diseases, non-communicable diseases, linked to what we eat, what we do with ourselves, lifestyles, including our culinary preferences, we have to do more for agriculture and for our farmers. We have to again take those of our best interested students who are doing agriculture at CXC and at CAPE and give them as part of their practical experience several acres of land, well fenced, well irrigated, and let them apply their theory to the actual practice of agriculture. We have to invest in storage mechanisms to deal with those areas of surpluses and begin to see agriculture not just in the primary form, but the agro-processors. The agro-processors need our support. And we have been able to find excellent examples in each of our country. In Antigua, the lady with the hot sauce, very good, a well-known brand. And we could go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. We have not been able to forge a marketing plan that gives this the kind of external export support and marketing support that is required. I was heartened some time ago to hear at the OECS that they are looking at a sub-regional branding with respect to, for example, our peppers within the Caribbean and promoting them under one brand so that the costs of marketing and penetration of markets can be more manageable. I think agriculture has been neglected, and in moving forward, we will have to do more for agriculture in the primary form and in the form of processing. I think that is going to be critical. And as I look even at St. Kitts and Nevis, we are good at certain things. We are good, for example, for 11 months of the year, we produce locally all the eggs that we need. December, having regard to the special demands of Christmas and Carnival and so on, we need to import. But we haven't developed side by side with the production of egg a poultry operation. And that should have been a natural way to go in terms of our efforts at food security and a supplemental industry that could come naturally from what we are doing. I think we have to look at these initiatives and to find innovative ways of financing the production of those activities and reduce the very high importation bill with respect to food for the community as a whole. We must look, ask, and ask why, in light of the offer which still stands from the former president of Guyana, Jacques Diop, that he was prepared to make land available in Guyana for commercial production of agriculture, we have not had the movement of people going there. Because yes, to do well, to be able to export, you need volume. And one of the constraints had been land. You couldn't ask for more land than what Guyana had. And yet we had that offer and we have not moved. What is creating that disinterest in a sector that really should matter to us is a matter, I think, that we need to look at. The financial services that we have been able in some respect to maneuver well and to navigate, notwithstanding many of the challenges coming in part from our friends in the EU. And we have been able to do well with respect to that, and we will continue to do well. The environment in which we are operating now and the one of the future certainly will be taxing and challenging. Someone the other day made reference to St. Kitts, but I believe it's an analogy we could make with application to the rest of the region. We are a small, constrained region. We are but small specks navigating on choppy seas internationally. And when we take into account the potential damage that releases from, say, example, an European Union Commission can do to our efforts at engaging internationally, we understand the challenges which are there and which we have to navigate, and that makes the development agenda very challenging. very challenging when we had to fight off this notion of harmful taxation. Significant sums of money, scarce resources had to be spent to deal with that particular challenge that arose 10, 15 years ago. We should not have to, as it were, to fight that battle again with respect to arbitrariness and hypocrisy with easy states applying their own agenda, notwithstanding we accepted the norm and the authority of the Global Forum in determining these tax matters. We have to be careful as we look forward. I want to end by making a plug for cultural industries, because in my view it has critical, important value. The entertainment and cultural industries are billion-dollar industries. Look how well Jamaica has done with an international repertoire of artists. Look how well Trinidad is emerging in terms of its own development and mastery of entertainment. We have to look for the niche areas. But for me, particularly attractive is that we have some of the most gifted people everywhere. And our educational system, by and large, is still largely too academic, and we have not paid attention to the fact that part of the challenge of the education system is to take our young people with their different gifts and talent and help them to make the best of it. And if their talent is in poetry, in rap, in music, in choreography, these must be enhanced, because these have value and these are very marketable. I believe we have to look seriously at our cultural outputs to give support to the creators of these cultural art forms, because they can become the source of substantial revenue. You can't find more finer talent than Bob Marley. The music lives long after the man. I was in Antigua the other night to hear one of the great, again, artists out of Jamaica. And even in his waning years, the man's voice is as fresh and moving as it was before. These are our talented people, and we have to find ways of creating more of those talent, make people find a sense of value. And I'm amazed that many of the young people who are found on the block with nowhere to go, you give them a mic and they do wonders for you. They make you happy. They make you dance. They make you cry. That is something worthy of help and support. And we have left out too many of our young people in the alleyways, in the rural parts, in the city centers. And all as we pass, we say they are lazy, they are uninterested. But these people have talents waiting to be explored, and all they are asking is for the current leadership, the people with the means and the ways to do things, to give them a helping hand so that they can perform to abide in glory. Each one of them may not become a Rihanna or even a Bob Marley, but they can do sufficiently well to bring productivity, production, and pride to themselves and to their country. So I want to just knock the cultural industries as one area I think that we have neglected. All our talents, all of our gifts, all of our creativity, a lot of it we are seeing from our young people who are just looking for the help. And I want to plug that area. The others, the tourism, There are many areas in which we can go: medical tourism, educational tourism. We can become in many ways like what Oxford is to England, because we are seeing coming to our region thousands of people who otherwise would not be able to get entry into overcrowded universities in North America and elsewhere, coming into the region, doing well in medicine and other areas. In St. Kitts and Nevis, for example, we have one of the largest vet schools in the hemisphere. One of the largest vet schools in the hemisphere. We have DeVry University now participating in our space. We are home to 3,000 plus students coming from America and Africa doing studies in a range of health services. How do we preserve that? We preserve that by ensuring that we have high quality accreditation systems so people can have confidence and students can get requisite funding and support for participation in these universities on our shores. As challenging as the present is, in my view, the future still beckons with a myriad of opportunities for us in these islands. It's for us to do the visioning, which some have spoken us. It's for us to imagine the greatness of this region that has been formed in the crucible of some of the worst atrocities known to mankind, and yet we are still standing strong and firm. And in the area of creativity, look at the number of Nobel laureates accredited to our region, the ability to imagine, the ability to vision, the presence of genius is in our midst. It's just for us to find it. I want to commend that we work hard to find the geniuses wherever they are and bring them to work to ensure that the next generation, because in my view, development is long-term. Development cannot be looked at within the 5-year cycle of the political life. Development extends beyond that. Development speaks to the fact that we must ensure that the generation after us have a better standard, that we bequeath a better standard of living and all things that are important to the generation coming after us. It is this intergenerational values that are at play that help preserve the society and preserve its longevity. I am optimistic that we can. I am optimistic that there are enough of us, and indeed everywhere. The change never required the large majority of people, but a devoted number of people singularly focused on making it happen. That has always been what has helped us. Some people will have the vision. Some people will come to believe the vision. And some people will only believe it when they see it in action. All of us can play a part, and I commend each of us to do something good for the people of the region. Thank you very much.
Kindly, Prime Minister, and I believe that all of us must catch that vision of the future. May I ask Dr. George Brathwaite to contribute to this discourse.
Good evening again to all. And it's pretty difficult to come after Prime Minister Harris in that he has just exposed the vision which I have bought into, which I wrote about in some of the things here that I will present. Nonetheless, I will start off with a quote. And I think it is fitting considering where we are today and where we must go. It says, We cannot plan for the future without a clear and realistic understanding of where we come from and how we got here. Politics must have a Janus face toward both the past and the future in order to correctly estimate the magnitudes and the nature of the problems we have to solve. Politics in modern societies is a permanent process of problem resolution, where the answers to today's problems constitute the problems of tomorrow. If we do not understand this human and social condition, but begin to think in terms of permanent problem solving and of social institutions as self-propelling machines, we should get into deep trouble. And I start here. We are in trouble. We are in trouble, but we recognize we're in trouble. And it is this recognition that allows us to be able to start critical thinking going again in the Caribbean. Given the presentations made throughout the day, it is obvious that we are no longer prepared to take things for granted. Also, the people listening to us, the people reading and listening to the experts and the technocrats, they are no longer prepared to play business as usual. There are 5 things, critical areas, that we have tended to overlook. And this was something, again, written 50 years ago. And it is moving in terms of not just carrying an economy, although an economy will pay for social and public goods, but it is carrying a society. And when you've taken a society to a higher and better level, then it is an onus on that particular society that would have achieved some benefits to be able to, in a position to guarantee not the pathway for the future, but the pathway to the security, so that those coming in the future knows that there must be that continuation. And I think even in terms of looking at governance, that is one of the issues that kept coming back up. The fact that after each 5 or 10 year period, you're seeing new plans in terms of what we will do for the next 5 years, and forgot that before, when we first came into office, we were planning for the next 25 and 50 years. So it is about being extractive. How do we extract the greatest of capabilities from within the context of our societies? How do we bring the youth, get them to participate, get them to be able to imagine themselves, the same Bennett Anderson theory, imagining community, imagining belonging, imagining the potency that comes with empowerment and achievement. The other thing is regulative. How much more do we really need to do to emphasize to governments in the region that the young people in this region, they're hurt. They're hurt. They feel to a large extent they've been left out. They've been left out not from the sake of talking, but they've been left out in terms of the decision making. We sit here and we pontificate about the things that are good for the youth, the things that the youth should do. And even CARICOM has presented a fantastic report. But fundamental to that report is the participation of the youth at the position of decision making. If God gave 2 good gifts, he gave choice on the one hand and love on the other. I believe love is innate. I believe choice is something that is determined, and hence it is the greater gift. And for that reason, we have to choose. We have to choose how do we make things so compatible within the society. And when I'm speaking about the society, now I'm not speaking about the Antiguan society or the Barbadian society or the Trinidadian society. I'm speaking about a Caribbean society, a Caribbean civilization that has been robbed for years of the legitimacy that should go along with the indigenous input Hence, it is why collectively as a region, we see those things that come in from outside as better and superior. And we fail to recognize that it is right here, as said, that we had the Nobel laureates. We produced the best rum. We just won flower shows. We got the best Rihanna and Bolt. We have reasons for celebration within the Caribbean. And as I heard the Prime Minister of Antigua remind persons at a sports award a couple of weeks ago, why wait until persons have shown that they've achieved before you assist them? Assist them now. And that is part of the distributive capacity, the distribution of wealth, the distribution of the capacity to choose, empowerment, enhancing, making people feel good about themselves. Though there is socio-cultural dynamics that I mentioned this morning that actually make the economics work. The economics, when you do have the growth, yes, we need it to pay for all the public goods. But we need first and foremost people. Development is all about people, freedom, and that capacity to choose a better life. Without those things, there's no development. You remain stationary. And that is when you become threatened. You become threatened by seeing the person coming from Jamaica to Antigua as a threat. You become threatened because you see them as endangering. They might be the highest qualified person, but the mere fact that you've seen them and they sound different from you, you believe that your job is threatened. Why? Because we have not paid attention during the building and the fashioning of the CARICOM single market to speak and address directly the issues of cross-cultural behavior. The need to understand that we were divided deliberately, but we ought not to, and we certainly should not choose to remain divided. Because it's divided, we have no chance. That was the same Barrows, Burnhams that we heard about. Integrate or perish. And that integrate was about survival. The perishing was about giving up. Taking things as inevitable. Things are not inevitable. The fourth thing is symbolic. In terms of symbol, it has so many connotations, and it goes right back to the people we lift up as pioneers, like in Antigua and Barbuda. How do we lift up V.C. Bird? In Barbados, how do we lift up Barrow? In CARICOM as a whole, how do we lift up people like the William Damases? And my good friend passed a couple of years ago, Professor Norman Gervin. How do we lift them up? The persons that not only saw removal of the other geopolitical significance, removing the barriers, the imaginary barriers that we create between one another. Frantz Fanon once said that what it creates is a psychological minus value. So we got into the habit of this othering, this subjectification and objectification. You become the subject of my taunt, and I become the object of your exploitation. And it's psychological. It is the barriers right now that need to be removed. The trade barriers have been removed. They started being removed with CARIFTA and with CARICOM and with the single market. The cultural barriers remain. Lastly, in that set, is in terms of responsive capability. And we need the responsive capability. How do we respond to the challenges? The challenges internal and their challenges external. Social forces that come from the external. How do we respond as a Caribbean community? And I'm saying that there can only be one response in terms of how we respond. We respond collectively. So when we're in Antigua, it is an Antiguan response. It's a collective response at the domestic level. When we go to the regional level, it is not Antigua anymore. It is the integrated development of the Caribbean community that matters and makes a difference, and hence it has to be a unified response. It's a collective response. So that when we meet the international stages such as the European Union, such as the United States that still wants to be the great hegemonic force, and we accept some things. We accept the assistance from Europe and the United States and all of these other places. But at what cost? As Prime Minister Harris rightly said this afternoon, one of the fundamental things in political theory is the whole notion of sovereignty. And part of that internal dynamic of sovereignty is the right to exercise taxation within your country. And that goes against the same grain that the United States defends in terms of their sovereignty and the right and the right for people not to be affected by external powers. So we have every right to defend what is ours. And what is ours is the integrity of the Caribbean that has been tainted, even if the error was made in Europe by a misperception, and it is misperceived. Not with us. We know what is there. It is misperceived by Europe into thinking that a list, whether old, new, or halfway in between, would not have a negative impact on the psyche of people doing business with the Caribbean. And it is things like that. That is this morning when I mentioned the word international primacy, that phrase. International primacy. How do we exercise our strength, our power, not coming from the United States, not coming from Germany, but coming from the very United Nations, which sanctioned us as a sovereign entity. And I think when we start looking at the future of the Caribbean, we have to change our posturing in the international. And we can only change our posturing in the international if at home we are comforted by recognizing that this is one family, one Caribbean, one people. At the moment, on the physical side, in terms of trade, there are many products, many services, and we hear the talk of the branding. Well, I can tell you what is branded in terms of the Caribbean. There is no doubt that when you travel or you live outside this region, that you recognize that the Caribbean is a place that is upheld. It is upheld because, in one sense, it says something about merriment, good time, good spirit. In another sense, it says something about excellence. When you hear the names of Viv Richards, Curtly Ambrose, Gary Sobers, Bob Marley, it symbolizes music, something mystic. And we have to sell it as that. We have to stop going hands out and begging. We sell ourselves and put value to ourselves. So it means that when the person out on the corner of the street down St. John's has gone home and made a pair of shoes and come back the next day to sell it, that you don't tell them it's worth $5 because they tell you give me $20. You know that they put something into it and it is deserving of that. So what I'm saying is we have to bring the extractive, the relative, the distributive, the symbolic, and the responsive mechanisms all into place. Economics is about cost-related decisions. Development is about people. Remember that. Development is about people. And you will only develop if you understand the cultural strands that run through this Caribbean. That is why we can speak about the resilience of the Caribbean. That is why we fear the words like International Monetary Fund, because we've seen how it has destroyed. Ladies and gentlemen, time is out, and I am sure I'm going to put together something in paper, and I will be gladly share this with all. I thank you.
For your usual thorough presentation, and we look forward to you continuing your contributions on these particular matters. And of course, partnering with this endeavor has been really, really a good one for us. And I thank you and I thank Caribbean Times for assisting us. Now, we move on to the next presenter or contributor, Mrs. Pamela Cook Hamilton. Pam?
So you don't want to say anything? Of course it does. That's we need the extra part of it. Um, Sylvia's bowed out on me. Okay, I just wanted to make a few points. I will not be long, but I think it's important to look at where we are and where it is we want to go. And I think the first thing I wanted to look at was the issue of sovereignty. We tend to banter this word around quite a bit, and I think in a way, it's a dangerous thing because we always tend to look at sovereignty as to what we're entitled to do for ourselves. But we must also remember that one of the biggest ideas of sovereignty is also the ability to choose to relinquish some of that sovereignty for the better good. And so part of the battle I think the Caribbean is facing now is how much of that sovereignty are we willing to really relinquish for the larger good? And if we are serious about doing that, are we willing to do it? And it should never be seen as an imposition because it is a sovereign choice that we would have made to enter a CARICOM, a CSME, and at some point an economic union. And that's a choice. It's not a reduction of anybody's sovereignty. It is a choice to reduce your own sovereignty in light of a larger picture and a larger whole. I'll never forget a friend of mine, well, actually an ambassador, very old ambassador, she's now dead. I had asked her why someone who would give up the opportunity to lead or be part of a large organization, at the time the EU Commission in Europe, when to come back to head up a very small organization that wasn't really of, frankly, the great kind of opportunity that it could have presented.